The settlement on Vedra 6 had always been quiet. It was the kind of place where days were slow, people knew each other by name, and the biggest news was when a shipment of fresh fruit arrived from a neighboring colony. Most people had come here to escape the chaos of the bigger worlds. They built small homes, planted gardens, and dreamed of a peaceful life. But peace didn't last. It began with strange signals in the night sky. At first, the settlers thought it was just another passing trade convoy. Then the signals became stronger, stranger, and closer. One morning, the warning sirens screamed across the settlement. Ships were coming, not traders, not allies, but the Zorath raiders. These were not ordinary thieves. They were ruthless fighters, who took what they wanted and left only ashes behind. The first attack came quickly. The Zorath didn't even land at first. They bombed the outpost's storage bays from the air. Containers of food, medicine, and fuel exploded into flames. The settlers tried to fight back with what little weapons they had, but it was useless. Their defense systems were old, slow, and meant to scare off small pirates, not an organized enemy fleet. After that, the raids became regular. The Zorath would swoop in, take supplies, and leave before anyone could stop them. Some people tried to flee, but the raiders destroyed any ship that attempted to leave. The sky itself became a prison. The people of Vedra 6 were trapped. Weeks passed, and things grew worse. Communications to other worlds failed. Every time someone tried to send a distress call, the signal was jammed. Some settlers believed the Zorath had destroyed the nearest relay station. Others thought the galaxy simply didn't care about a small mining world so far from the main trade routes. At first, the settlement council tried to keep hope alive. They told the people help would come, that someone, anyone, would notice what was happening. But as days turned into weeks, the leaders grew quiet. Everyone could see the truth in their eyes. No help was coming. Life became about survival. Families moved into underground storage rooms, turning them into makeshift shelters. They rationed what little food they had left, often going hungry so children could eat. Water was filtered and reused until it tasted like metal. Nights were the worst, because no one knew when the next attack would come. Despite the danger, a few brave defenders stayed above ground to guard the settlement. They were miners, engineers, and traders, ordinary people holding old rifles and homemade explosives. They stood watch on the walls, knowing they couldn't win but unwilling to let the enemy take the settlement without a fight. The Zorath, meanwhile, seemed to be preparing for something bigger. They stopped taking only supplies and began targeting the power plant and water pumps. It was clear they wanted to break the settlers completely, forcing them to surrender or die. By the time the month ended, the settlement was a shadow of its former self. Once busy streets were silent. The market stalls were empty. Children no longer played outside. The only sounds were the distant hum of Zorath patrol ships and the low voices of guards planning how to hold out for just one more day. Some whispered about trying to fight their way out, one last desperate run to escape. But no one had the eye, fuel, or the weapons for such a journey. Others spoke of hiding deep in the mines, hoping the Zorath would give up. But the raiders showed no sign of leaving. They had claimed Vedra 6 as theirs, and no one dared to challenge them. Then came the night before the final attack. The enemy fleet grew larger in the skies above. From the watchtowers, the defenders counted dozens of ships, more than they had ever seen. Everyone knew what that meant. This was the end. The Zorath weren't coming to raid this time. They were coming to take the settlement completely. That night, there was no laughter, no conversation, only silence. Families huddled together underground, holding hands in the dim light of flickering lamps. Parents tried to tell stories to calm their children, but their voices shook. The defenders above tightened their grips on their rifles, knowing they might not live to see the morning. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a small spark of hope remained. It was faint, almost gone, but it was there. people prayed. Not to be saved because they didn't believe in miracles anymore, but for the strength to face whatever came. They thought no one would come for them. They believed they had been left behind. They didn't know that far away, across the cold darkness of space, someone had heard their call. They didn't know that help was already on its way. They didn't know that by the next sunrise, the sky above Vedra 6 would burn, not with the fire of the enemy, but with the arrival of warriors from Earth. The first light of dawn barely touched the horizon when the attack began. It started with the low, distant rumble of engines. The defenders on the wall stiffened, their eyes scanning the sky. Dark shapes appeared against the pale morning clouds, growing larger with every passing second. The Zorath were coming, and this time there were no quick raids or hit-and-run tactics. This was a full assault. Within minutes, the sky over Vedra 6 was filled with enemy craft. Sleek, black ships swooped down in tight formation, their wings glinting in the light. The ground shook as the first wave of energy blasts struck the settlement's outer defenses. The old metal walls groaned under the force, and explosions lit up the dusty streets. The local defenders opened fire with whatever weapons they had, rusted rifles, salvaged cannons, even mining lasers, but their shots barely scratched the enemy. Ships. The Zorath answered with relentless barrages, forcing the defenders to duck for cover. Dust and smoke filled the air, making it hard to see, and the smell of burning metal stung their noses. Underground, families huddled in their shelters. Hearing the muffled thunder of battle above, mothers clutched their children close, whispering promises they weren't sure they could keep. The ground shook again and again as the fighting raged on. Some prayed silently. Others simply sat in silence, waiting for the moment the enemy would break through. Up on the wall, Commander Havel, the leader of the local defense, barked orders into his radio. "Hold the line! Don't let them through!" His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed his fear. He knew their line wouldn't hold for long. The Zorath were too many, too well armed. Just as the outer defenses began to crumble, something strange happened. The defenders noticed sudden flashes high above the battlefield. Not the red glow of Zorath weapons, but bright streaks of white light cutting through the clouds. At first, no one knew what it was. Some thought it was another wave of enemy reinforcements. Others feared it was a new kind of weapon. Then the Zorath ships began to scatter. The enemy formations that had been so tight and organized suddenly broke apart in confusion. Their fire grew less focused, their maneuvers sloppy. The defenders exchanged bewildered glances. "What's going on up there?" one of the younger guards shouted over the noise. Commander Havel narrowed his eyes, watching the sky. And then he saw them. Dark shapes descending at incredible speed, trailing. Fire and smoke as they cut through the atmosphere. These were not Zorath ships. Their designs were different, sleek, powerful, built for war in a way that made even the enemy craft look fragile. One of the ships roared overhead so low that the defenders could see the symbol painted on its hull. A sharp-winged eagle with the stars of Earth above it. Havel's heart skipped a beat. He knew that emblem. Every soldier in the colonies knew it. It was the mark of the Earth Defense Corps, the most feared and respected fighting force in human space. The dropships didn't slow down. They plunged toward the battlefield with engines, screaming, scattering enemy fire as if it were nothing. The defenders watched in awe as the ships released clusters of armored figures, each one encased in heavy exosuits that gleamed silver and black. They hit the ground hard, the shock waves kicking up clouds of dust. For a moment, the battlefield froze. Both Zorath and settlers stared at the newcomers. Then, in perfect unison, the Earth warriors moved. They advanced with a speed and precision that seemed almost unreal. Their rifles spat controlled bursts of fire, cutting through enemy troops like they were paper. Explosions followed in their wake as they cleared the streets, each squad covering the other with flawless coordination. The defenders, still in shock, felt something they hadn't felt in weeks: hope. These soldiers didn't just look strong, they fought like they couldn't lose. Every move was calculated, every shot deliberate. The Zorath, so confident only moments ago, now scrambled to retreat from the humans' advance. From the shelters below, the settlers could hear the change. In the battle, the deep, steady rhythm of earth weapons replaced the chaotic noise of the defenders' old rifles. The sound was different, controlled, confident, unstoppable. Children peeked out from behind their parents, asking in small voices, "Who are they?" The parents, still stunned, could only answer, "They came from Earth." On the surface, the dropships circled back, providing covering fire for the ground troops. The warriors used signals and short-clipped words over their comms, but even without hearing them, it was clear they knew exactly what they were doing. One squad moved straight for the settlement gates, blasting apart the Zorath heavy units that had been trying to force their way inside. Another squad took high ground on a ridge, picking off enemy pilots and forcing their ships to retreat into higher airspace. For the first time since the siege began, the Zorath were not advancing. They were falling back. Commander Havel couldn't help but grin. He grabbed his radio and shouted to his people, "You see that? Earth came for us! Keep fighting! Push them back!" The defenders rallied, their voices rising over the roar of battle. Side by side with the Earth warriors, they fought with renewed strength. It was as if the mere presence of these soldiers had breathed life back into them. The Zorath tried one last counterattack, sending in a wave of fighters to strafe the battlefield. But the Earth forces were ready. Anti-air turrets unfolded from the dropships, and within seconds the attackers were nothing but burning wreckage falling from the sky. By the time the sun rose fully, the battle was no longer one-sided. The settlers had gone from desperate defense to holding their ground with pride. The Zorath had been stopped for the first time in weeks, and it was all because Earth's warriors had fallen from the sky. The warriors from Earth moved like nothing the people of Vedra 6 had ever seen. The moment their boots hit the ground, they were already in motion, fast, focused, and perfectly in sync. Their heavy exosuits hissed softly as they adjusted to the planet's gravity, and their dark visors hid their faces, making them look more like living machines than humans. But there was no mistaking their purpose. They had come to fight, and they knew exactly how to win. The first squad stormed forward through the dust and smoke, their rifles firing short, controlled bursts. Each shot found its mark, dropping Zorath, fighters with precise accuracy. They didn't waste a single movement. When one soldier reloaded, the others covered them. When one advanced, the rest shifted to shield their flank. It was like watching a well-rehearsed dance, but every step was deadly. The defenders of Vedra 6 watched in awe. They had fought the Zorath for weeks with shaky hands and desperate courage, never sure if their next breath would be their last. But these soldiers, they didn't seem afraid at all. They fought as though the outcome was already decided. In the middle of the chaos, a group of Zorath warriors tried to push through a side street to outflank the defenders. They didn't get far. One Earth soldier, wearing a suit marked with the number 3, stepped into their path. She didn't speak, didn't hesitate, just opened fire with her rifle in a smooth, sweeping motion. The enemy unit scattered, but she pursued, moving low and fast, clearing the street within seconds. The settlers who had been hiding in the nearby buildings peeked out, eyes wide, realizing they had just been saved. Meanwhile, a second squad moved toward the main gate, where the largest Zorath force was concentrated. The defenders had been barely holding that point for hours, but now the Earth soldiers surged forward, their boots thudding heavily on the ground. Explosions followed them as they lobbed grenades into enemy positions, forcing the Zorath to break. Cover. The instant the enemy tried to run, sharp bursts from the soldiers' rifles cut them down. The dropships above didn't just leave after unloading the troops, they stayed, hovering in the sky like massive protective beasts. From there, Undersides came streams of support fire, targeting enemy armor and keeping the battlefield clear for the ground troops. The combination of precise ground movement and powerful air support made it impossible for the Zorath to hold their positions. Civilians who had been trapped inside their homes began peeking out as the noise of battle shifted. They saw armored figures moving through the streets, not raiders but saviors. One little boy even stepped out into the open before his mother yanked him back, but not before he waved at a passing Earth soldier. The soldier didn't break stride but gave a small nod, a silent promise that the boy was safe. The Earth warriors weren't just here to fight, they were here to protect. More than once they broke formation to shield civilians from stray fire or to carry the wounded to safer positions. One soldier lifted a collapsed metal beam off a trapped miner with the ease of moving a chair, then returned to the battle without a word. As the Zorath began to realize they were losing ground, they tried to regroup. Command ships barked orders from the sky, and enemy squads attempted to form tighter lines. But the Earth soldiers were always one step ahead. They moved as if they could predict the enemy's every decision. If the Zorath pushed forward, the humans cut them off. If they tried to retreat, the soldiers blocked their path. The defenders of Vedra 6 found themselves drawn into the fight again, this time not in desperation but with real hope. They fought alongside the Earth troops, taking cover when ordered, firing when directed, moving as part of a larger force instead of scattered individuals. For the first time, they felt like they were part of something greater, like they weren't just trying to survive, but actually fighting to win. In one narrow alley, Commander Havel fought side by side with an Earth sergeant. The two covered each other, trading quick glances and short nods, as if they'd been allies for years instead of minutes. The sergeant's voice came through a translator in Havel's earpiece. "Keep your head down, Commander. We're not losing you today." That single sentence hit Havel harder than any bullet could. In all the weeks of siege, no one had spoken to him like that. No one had fought for him and his people with such certainty. He didn't even know the soldier's name, but in that moment it didn't matter. By mid-morning, the battle was shifting. Completely. The Zorath were no longer attacking, they were falling back. Their movements became erratic, their formations sloppy. Some abandoned their weapons entirely and fled into the wilderness beyond the settlement. Every street the Earth warriors cleared was another step toward reclaiming the outpost. The sight of the enemy retreating lit a fire in the settlers' hearts. They shouted to each other, to the soldiers, to anyone who could hear, "We can do this! We can win!" The Earth troops never paused to celebrate, though. They pressed forward, clearing every building, every rooftop, every alley where the enemy might be hiding. Their mission was clear: secure the settlement completely and leave no threat behind. When the last Zorath fighter on the western side was neutralized, the Earth commander gave a signal, and the troops regrouped in the main square. Their armor was scratched and scorched, their weapons steaming from heat, but their posture was as steady as when they had arrived. To the people of Vedra 6, it was as if the storm had passed and sunlight had broken through for the first time in weeks. The warriors had fallen from the sky like a miracle, and they hadn't just fought for the settlement, they had fought with it. Somewhere deep inside, every person there understood something important. These soldiers weren't just rescuers. They were a promise from Earth itself, a promise that no one, no matter how far away, would be left behind. The sun climbed higher in the pale sky, its light spilling over a battlefield that looked nothing like it had an hour earlier. Where chaos had ruled, now there was order. Earth's warriors and the defenders of Vedra 6 were working together, step by step, to push the Zorath completely out of the settlement. The air still carried the smell of smoke and scorched metal, but the sound of battle had changed. It was no longer the desperate crackle of scattered gunfire. It was a steady, controlled rhythm. The tide had turned. The Zorath didn't give up easily. They regrouped on the far side of the settlement, pulling in their remaining ground troops and calling down reinforcements from the fleet above. Dark streaks appeared in the sky as more enemy dropships descended, and for a moment, the defenders felt the familiar twist of fear in their stomachs. But the Earth soldiers didn't hesitate. They moved quickly, spreading out into tight formations, placing their heavy weapons in key positions. From the command dropship above, orders came through crisp and calm. Hold positions, anticipate flanking maneuvers, prioritize civilian safety. There was no panic in the voice, only certainty, as if the commander already knew how the battle would end. The first wave of fresh Zorath troops charged toward the settlement's southern edge, thinking it was weakly defended. But Earth's warriors were ready. Heavy walkers, massive two-legged machines armed with cannons, stepped forward from behind the buildings. Their weapons lit up the air with blinding bursts, forcing the enemy to scatter before they even reached the walls. The ground shook with each step of the machines, and the defenders watching from rooftops felt a surge of pride. In the west, a smaller group of Zorath fighters tried to sneak through the mining tunnels to attack from behind, but settlers who knew those tunnels by heart guided an Earth squad right into the path of the invaders. The ambush was swift and decisive. The Earth soldiers cut off the enemy escape routes, their firepower pinning the Zorath in place until the last one fell. When it was over, the squad leader simply nodded to the miners in thanks before moving on to the next objective. Everywhere in the settlement, people were helping. Some carried ammunition to the front lines, running through the streets with boxes in their arms despite the danger. Others tended to the wounded, setting up makeshift clinics inside reinforced buildings. The unity between soldiers and settlers was unlike anything Vedra 6 had seen before. These weren't just outsiders rescuing a doomed world. This had become a shared fight. The Zorath, realizing they were losing their grip, tried one last desperate move. Their largest gunship descended from the clouds, its shadow falling over half the settlement, its cannons powered up with a deep, menacing hum. If it fired, it could level the central square and wipe out dozens of fighters in one strike. Before it could attack, 2 Earth soldiers sprinted across the rooftops, leaping from building to building until they reached a point high enough to get a clear shot. One of them, wearing a suit marked with the symbol of a hawk, aimed a rocket launcher at the underside of the gunship. The rocket struck home, punching through the armor in a burst of fire. The ship wobbled, its engines sputtering, and then another squad on the ground finished it off with a second barrage. The massive craft tilted sideways and crashed into the open plains beyond the settlement, sending up a wave of dust. The defenders cheered, their voices carrying across the square. Even the Earth soldiers allowed themselves a brief pause, scanning the skies to confirm no more enemy gunships were descending. The Zorath formations on the ground began to crumble. Without their air support, they were vulnerable, and they knew it. Commander Havel, still fighting on the eastern side, realized what was happening. He shouted into his radio, "They're breaking! Push them now!" His words were picked up by every channel, and suddenly the energy on the battlefield shifted again. The humans advanced, not cautiously, but with determination. The Earth troops led the way, their armor glinting in the sunlight, their weapons spitting precise bursts of fire. Behind them, the defenders followed, covering flanks and securing streets. Every block they cleared felt like reclaiming a piece of their home. One alley. A group of young settlers who had never fought before took cover behind a wall, while an Earth soldier showed them how to aim and fire without exposing themselves. "Breathe steady. Keep your sight on the target," he said, his voice calm even under fire. The settlers followed his instructions, and together they drove back the enemy in that sector. On the far northern side, a squad of Earth snipers had taken position on a rocky ridge. From there, they could see the entire battlefield. One by one, they picked off Zorath officers, sowing confusion in the enemy ranks. Every time a leader fell, the rest of that unit faltered, their attacks growing weaker and less coordinated. By midday, the settlement was no longer a battlefield. It was a trap for the Zorath. Every street they entered had defenders waiting. Every open space was covered by earth firepower. Their retreat routes were blocked by heavy walkers and fortified barricades. The enemy was being squeezed into smaller and smaller pockets with nowhere left to run. The settlers could hardly believe how quickly the situation had changed. Only hours ago, they had been bracing for the end. Now they were watching the invaders, who had terrorized them for weeks, flee like frightened animals. And it wasn't just because Earth's warriors were stronger. It was because those warriors had given the settlers a reason to fight again. By the time the last major Zorath unit was driven into the open plains, the battle was all but decided. Earth's commander called for a final push, and the combined force of soldiers and settlers swept forward. Enemy weapons clattered to the ground as the surviving raiders abandoned the fight and scrambled into the sky. The warriors didn't celebrate yet. They held their positions, scanning for any sign of a counterattack. But there was none. The skies, once filled with enemy ships, were now clear except for the distant silhouettes of fleeing Zorath craft. The turning point had passed. The siege of Vedra 6 was broken. The people knew there was still work to be done, repairs to make, wounded to heal, and a world to rebuild. But for the first time in months, they stood in their streets without fear. And they knew one thing. For certain, the day Earth's warriors had fallen from the sky was the day their future was returned to them. As the last echoes of battle faded into silence, the people of Vedra 6 slowly stepped out from their hiding places. The air was filled with a strange mixture of relief, disbelief, and hope. For months, they had lived under the shadow of fear, uncertain if they would ever see a peaceful day again. Now, thanks to the arrival of Earth's warriors, that peace was finally within reach. Families emerged from underground shelters, blinking in the bright sunlight. Streets, once littered with debris and scorched by energy blasts, were now quiet, with only the soft hum of repair drones moving among the ruins. Settlers gathered in small groups, sharing stories of survival, their voices filled with both sorrow for what was lost and gratitude for what was saved. Among them, Commander Havel moved through the crowd, his armor scratched and dusty, but his expression proud. He shook hands with the Earth soldiers, many of whom were already tending to the wounded or organizing supplies. The bond between the settlers and the warriors was clear. This was no simple rescue mission. It was a shared victory, a new beginning. One by one, survivors approached the Earth Commander to thank him. Their words were simple, but heartfelt. You came when we thought no one would. You gave us hope when all seemed lost. We will never forget what you have done for us. The commander listened quietly, offering words of comfort and promises that Earth would always stand by them. Children, once frightened and hiding in dark corners, now played in the streets under the watchful eyes of the soldiers. A young girl, clutching a worn toy, shyly handed a flower to one of the warriors. He smiled beneath his helmet and gently took the flower, nodding in thanks. It was a small moment, but it spoke volumes about the bond that had formed between strangers from different worlds. Repairs began immediately. Earth's engineers joined local workers to restore power, fix water systems, and rebuild damaged homes. The settlers shared stories about their lives and their hopes for the future, while the soldiers talked about the many worlds they had visited and the battles they had fought. Though their backgrounds were different, they found common ground in their shared desire for peace and safety. In the days that followed, the people of Vedra 6 held ceremonies to honor those who had fought and those who had fallen. They painted murals on walls, telling the story of the siege and the warriors who came from the sky to save them. These images became symbols of hope and courage for generations to come. Commander Havel stood before the assembled crowd at one such ceremony, his voice steady and strong. "We thought we were forgotten," he said. "We believed no help was coming. But Earth showed us that no matter how far away you are never alone. These warriors who fought beside us are proof that when the need is greatest, help will come." The Earth Commander replied with humility, "We did what anyone would do. No one should be left behind. Today, Vedra 6 is free because you never gave up. Your courage made this victory possible." As peace settled over the settlement, the sky was clear once more. The stars shone brightly, and the people of Vedra 6 looked up with gratitude, knowing that Earth's warriors had come down from those stars to stand with them in their darkest hour. Though the scars of war remained, the future was full of promise. The settlers rebuilt their homes and their lives, stronger and more united than before. They told their children stories of the day the sky burned with light, not from destruction, but from the arrival of heroes. The story of Vedra 6 became a reminder to all who heard it. No matter how isolated or forgotten a place may seem, when Earth's warriors fall from the sky, they come not to abandon, but to protect, to fight, and to win.